Oh yeah, I'll have some chips.
You can't touch this. You can't touch this. You can't touch this.
Yep, okay. Can't touch this. I get it. Sorry. Okay. All right.
You can't touch this.
Oh, you've got to be kidding me. What can I eat? Can someone please just tell me what I can eat?
Hello, and welcome to a tutorial on diet and nutrition for those living with type 2 diabetes. My name is Lorena Drago. I am a registered dietitian and certified diabetes care and education specialist. So let's start with this tutorial. So where do we start thinking about health? Usually it happens at the supermarket. And in this presentation, I am going to help you score an A+ in supermarket shopping, because it is pretty confusing even for me. And I have been doing this for many years. And one of the questions that patient asks is this good for diabetes? Is this good for high blood pressure? There are so many different claims that it is just dizzying when you are in the supermarket. So let's begin. So one of the areas that most people visit if they eat animal foods is the area where they can find beef and chicken and pork and fish. So if you are like the majority of people, you probably think, well, chicken is probably best, fish is best, let me stay away from red meats. But sometimes, well, I do want to have a hamburger. And all these questions, most people know, well, if I remove the skin, it's probably better, but then am I going to sacrifice the moistness of the product? So what are the best products to buy? And let's talk a little bit about cuts. And so here we have some cuts of beef and chicken, round roast, skinless chicken thighs, top sirloin steak, 96% lean ground beef, and chuck shoulder. So since this is a tutorial, I want you to rate your knowledge. And I want you to identify which of these cuts has the lowest and the highest amount of fat. And why should that even matter? Well, what happens is that in studies of different populations, when the amount of saturated fat is replaced with other type of fats like monos and polyfats, then there is a lower risk of heart disease. So that's the reason why you're probably hearing from health experts, cut back on the saturated fat and replace it with mono and poly. So let's go back to this question. Which one do you think has the lowest? And which one do you think has the highest amount of fat? Okay, so this is a list of the different types of cuts of beef and also chicken. So let's take a look at what this colors means. The green color, it's really the total amount of fat. But the total amount of fat, it's not as important as the amount of saturated fat, which is depicted in yellow. Why is that? Remember what I just said. Because in many populations, there is an association between saturated fat and heart disease. So when that saturated fat is replaced by the other fats, poly and mono, there is a lower risk of heart disease. So let's take a look at round, 1.4. Top sirloin steak, 1.9. Let's look at 95, 96% ground beef, 2.4. That's pretty high. Let's take a look at the shoulder steak, 1.9. And then let's look at chicken thigh, the skinless one, 2.6. Were you surprised? Well, if you chose chicken thigh as the leanest cut, you're probably not alone, but you're certainly wrong. The reason is that chicken thigh does contain more fat, even when the skin is removed. So when you go shopping, you have to make sure that if you like beef, you select cuts such as round or those that end in loin or have loin in the name, because that will assure you that you will have the least amount of saturated fats. When it comes to chicken, when it comes to turkey, the part of the chicken and turkey that have the most amount of saturated fat is, drum roll, the wing, because that is what has the most amount of skin. So there you go. You have to pay attention, and that is because saturated fat, again, in many studies, have shown that it could increase the risk of heart disease. Okay, so let's go. Milk trivia. So if you drink milk, you probably buy either low fat or 1%, 2%, or whole milk. What I want you to think about is which of these milks, this type of milks, has the least amount of carbohydrate. And what is carbohydrate? Well, carbohydrate is a nutrient. We talked about fats. It's a nutrient that when it's digested, it converts into sugar. So the more carbohydrate foods we eat, that means that our blood sugar level is going to increase. So that's the reason why many people with type 1 and some people with type 2 are always mindful of the amount of carbohydrates that they eat. So going back to milk, which of these three types of milk, low fat, no fat, and whole milk, which one do you think has the least amount of carbohydrates? Okay, let me give you the answer. So there's the food label for whole milk and the one for skim milk. So let's take a look. The serving size is 8 ounces or 1 glass, 1 cup. Let's look at the carbohydrate, 12. Let's look at the carbohydrate, 12. Was that a trick question? Yes, it was. Why? Because all these types of milk have the same amount of carbohydrate. So what's the difference? The difference is in the fat. Take a look. Total fat, 8 grams. And again, here is that saturated fat, 5 grams. Let's look at the saturated fat here, 0 and 0. Then let's look at the calories, 150, 90, because now there's no fat, the calories are lower. So again, when you're buying milk, the reason that people choose the lower fat is because it has lower fat, not because it has lower carbohydrate. So now, move over milk. If you have been seeing different types of milk in the market, soy milk and pea milk and almond milk and coconut milk and cashew milk, you are not alone. We have made room for plant-based milk. So is that better? Are you drinking cashew milk? Are you drinking almond milk? So is it better? Is it better for someone that has diabetes or hypertension? Well, let me show you, because this is the tutorial. So let's take a look at the different types of milk that you probably have seen in the supermarket. Oat milk, almond milk, ripple, which is a type of pea milk, pea meaning peas, soy milk, and almond and cashew. So again, this is a trivia. Which one scores the highest in protein? So we talked about fat, and we talked about which type of fat we want to stay away from. We talked about carbohydrate. That's the nutrient that has the most effect on blood sugar levels. And now we're talking about protein. So protein is our building block. And all of us need protein. And at the same time, we also want to make sure that we have sufficient amount of protein because it also keeps us fuller longer. And let's see, so which one has scores the highest? Well, thanks to my friends at Nutrition Action Newsletter, they did the work for me. So here's the scorecard. Let's take a look at soy milk. So what they have done is, you see these two little check marks? They have given them their best bite, and the ones that have one check mark, that means that they're still good, but not as good as the one that has the two check marks. So let's take a look at the protein. So soy milk is pretty good, very similar to cow's milk, and this is per 1 cup. When we look at pea protein, like the Ripple one, we see that the protein is also pretty high. So that is pretty good. Now, you also have to watch out for added sugar. And what should give you a clue? The clue will be when there is something that says vanilla. When it's vanilla, or sometimes when it's chocolate, then that means that most likely it has added sugar. In this case, this one doesn't have any. And because this is made out of plants, you don't have to worry too much about cholesterol, because cholesterol is only found in animal foods. So let's take a look at the scorecard of almond milk and oat milk. So let's take a look at protein. It is dismal, just 1 gram of protein. Let's take a look at oat. 1 to 2 grams. It is dismal. So if you want a good protein source, then your best bet is soy or pea milk. I also want to let you know, take a look at this. Extra creamy. You're going to find many versions of plant-based milk that are extra creamy. That's usually used in coffee because you want that creaminess to kind of mimic that cream feel. But what happens is oats, it's a good source of carbs. It might be good carbs, but what happens is that the carbohydrate also increases. Then some individuals are very concerned about what they buy and the planet. So let's take a look at all these different types of milk and how they rate in terms of their carbon dioxide, water use, and land use. So when we compare, dairy milk usually yields the more carbon dioxide. But then when we look at water, what requires water? Well, almonds and rice require a lot of water. And then when it comes to land use, well, it does make sense that we need cows and cows need more land. So we are going to see that this is a higher number. So what is, in general, what are the recommendations when it comes to selecting the best dairy or plant-based? So in other words, if you follow these steps, you're going to get an A+ in dairy shopping. Check the calcium and vitamin D. You want to make sure that you get at least 300 milligrams and 100 IUs or 2.5 micrograms of vitamin D. You also want to make sure, especially if you are plant-based only, that means you're a vegan, that you get your B12, because B12 is only found in animal foods. So if you're a vegan, you need to supplement. You also want to mimic some of the protein that you get from dairy, and that is 8 grams. So 7 grams if you're buying plant-based. Limit the amount of added sugars. I would say skip the rice milk because of its arsenic level. Another thing to consider is planet health. And remember the carbs if you're selecting extra creamy. So let's go and talk about cereal. This is the cereal killer. Okay, I just could not resist using that. So, do you buy cereal? And if you're like me, there is this huge aisle with cereal choices, with all these different claims about whole grain, organic, non-NGO, gluten-free, with health claims such as lowering cholesterol. And it is just, you can spend an entire morning just looking at label claims and ingredients. So here, this tutorial is going to tell you how to separate the wheat from the chaff so that you don't get to spend all your morning buying from cereal. But before we do that, remember, this is a trivia. Which of these cereals scores a C or even a D? Cheerios, Corn Chex, or Blueberry Cheerios? So some things that I want to let you know is this. You see this gluten-free? Well, gluten-free is everywhere. Unless you have celiac disease or a gluten intolerance, you don't need gluten-free. You don't need gluten-free if you are cutting back calories because you want to manage your weight. You don't need it because it is going to lower your carbs. You really don't. So don't worry too much about that. Do you need to have whole grains? Yes. So the more whole grains you have, the better off you are. So isn't corn a whole grain? Yes, it is. What about oats? Is oat a whole grain? Yes, it is. So then, how do you make a choice? So let's take a look. Well, the first thing is, let's look at the nutrition label. The first thing that I want to let you know is look at the serving size, because the serving size determines everything that's here. So here we have 1 cup, and here we have 1.5 cups. Okay? Now, this is volume and this is weight. So this is 38, 31, and 36. So it's pretty comparable in terms of weight, not volume. So again, most people look at the sugar, right? So what I want to tell you is, yes, look at the added sugars. Not so much the sugars, but the added sugars, because many different foods will have naturally occurring sugars. And that's fine, like a fruit, like milk. They have naturally occurring sugar. What you want to avoid is the added sugars. And then you want to look at the total carbohydrate. And this number here, the total sugar, is already included in the total carbohydrate. So you don't need to look at it or add it. It's already here. This 10 here is already included in the 29. So all of them per serving have very similar amount of carbohydrates. So that's great. And so here, everything looks about the same. So that's when I want you to go to the ingredient list. So let's take a look. You want to make sure that the ingredients, especially the first 2 or 3 ingredients, because it goes in order of the amount of the ingredient in the product. So this product is mostly whole grains, not so much malted barley, because this is at the end of the list. So I see that the first ingredient is a whole grain, A+. Second ingredient, whole grain, A+. Now let's take a look here. Whole grain corn, that's a whole grain, that's excellent. Why do we want whole grains? They are carbohydrate, but they have more fiber, more vitamins and minerals, and whole grain has been associated with lower risk of diabetes. It helps you manage better your blood sugar levels. So you want to have more whole grains, not just you, but everyone in your family. But let's look at the second ingredient, cornmeal. Cornmeal is refined grain, it's not whole grain. What's the third ingredient? Is sugar. So let's take a look at the blueberry Cheerios. The first ingredient is whole grain oats. Excellent. But let's take a look at the second ingredient is sugar. And then blueberry puree concentrate. Yes, it might give it a great color, but that does not mean that you are getting all the benefits of blueberries. You're probably just better off adding the fruit to your cereal and getting the goodness of the real fruit. So going back to my question, which one scored the D? So here we have again, our friends from Nutrition Action Newsletter have been kind enough to do all this review for us. And they have selected the Purely O's, 2 check marks, and then we see 0 added sugars, very nice amount of fiber, and a little bit of protein. But then the corn checks, nothing, no check mark, and then the blueberry Cheerios, no check mark. So what is your homework? When you're going to the supermarket to select your cereals, and you see wheat and corn, that's enriched flour, it's not whole grain. If you see ingredients such as corn flour, degerminated corn, cornmeal, rice flour, that is not whole grain. You want to make sure that you select things such as oats, ground rice, whole wheat, sprouted grains, quinoa, millet. Then you know that you're getting the goodness of whole grain. Make sure that you look at serving size. If your serving size says 1 cup, but you're eating 2 cups, everything doubles. Make sure that you select cereals with higher fiber, 3 grams or more, and make sure that you look at the order of the ingredients. So if you see a cereal that sugar is the second or third ingredient, you know that you are getting a C or a D cereal. Well, let's go to our smooth operator. And what are we going to talk about? Yogurt, one of my favorite snacks. So the question is to milk or not to milk. Just like milk and plant-based beverages, we have the same thing. On the left, we have all these yogurts made out of milk, and on the right, we have yogurts that are made with plant-based beverages or ingredients. So what should we be looking for? So here they are again. We are looking for the ones that have very little saturated fat. We want to make sure that we don't have a lot of added sugars. We want to make sure that we have a decent amount of protein. And again, why? Protein is the building block of our cells, and it is important. It really keeps most of us full when we have good protein sources in the diet. So we need enough, not a lot, but we need enough for our bodies to sustain weight. We don't want to have excess of carbohydrate because that is the nutrient that has the most effect on blood glucose. And also when we decrease the amount of total fat, then that also helps to process the carbs. So here we are looking at plant-based, plain or unsweet. And we see that some of the cereals, some of the yogurts also have decent amount of protein that has been added to them. And just be mindful that some of these plant-based are using coconut, which increases the amount of saturated fat. So this is your homework when you go shopping for yogurt. Check the added sugars. Yogurt, because it's made out of milk or some grains, will have some carbohydrate. Make sure that you get yogurts that don't have more than 2 grams of fat per cup. Make sure that you get good, decent amount of protein. And usually some yogurts, plant-based, fava beans, will be added to it to boost the amount of protein. And of course, soy, just like soy milk and soy yogurt, it has the most amount of protein. Some yogurts have fiber, which normally there wouldn't be fiber in yogurt. But the reason is that chicory root or inulin is added to the yogurt, and that is a processed fiber. But be careful because it may increase your gas. And be mindful of coconut yogurts because of the amount of saturated fat. So in some of them is 4 to 8 grams. And the recommendations for most adults, all of us, whether we have diabetes or not, is no more than 15 per day. So 4 to 8 grams in just one yogurt might be a lot. So here we go again, food you need. So guess what we're going to be talking about? You guessed it, it's been a slice. How do you choose the healthiest bread? So let's take a look at all these breads that are here. Again, all these claims, 15 grain, whole grain, this nice dark color, ancient grain. It sounds not only appealing, but it sounds like, wow, it has to be good because it's ancient. And this one has 13 grams of protein. It has a killer topping, whatever that means, 26 grams of whole grains. And of course, this wraps garden spinach herbs. So dark green leafy vegetables. What's better than that? What is more nutritious than that? So which one do you think is the healthiest bread? Drum roll, drum roll, drum roll. So your homework, the first ingredient, check it out. Whole wheat flour or sprouted grain. Don't buy ancient flour. I know it sounded great, but don't get it. It's just enriched flour. You want to make sure that when a bread says whole grain, that it's mostly whole grain and not white flour. Check for added sugars. Sometimes you might see a claim that says no fructose corn syrup or high fructose corn syrup. But then other types of sugars are added. Maybe it's not high fructose corn syrup, but they still add other sugars. Check for fiber, at least 2 grams of fiber, and then check for the serving size. Sometimes you might see that it's 90 calories a slice, but it's just a slice. If you have 2, that's 180. So let's go back here. When we look at these breads, this was the better bread. Not just because it says 15 grain, but because when you read the ingredient list, the first 2 ingredients are whole grains. This one just says enriched wheat. That is not, that's refined. This one also had half of it was whole grain, but the other half was refined. And guess what? These wraps that are made with spinach, well, when you look at the ingredient list, it's really not spinach. It is spinach powder. That's nothing. So don't be fooled. If you want something that has spinach, add spinach to it. Don't think because it has that color, it has spinach to it. So, ready for an oil change? Okay, so here is your oil test. We have vegetable oil, which is usually soybean, canola, olive oil, and corn oil. Which one has more cholesterol? Which one has more calories? And which one is healthier? So select your answer. I'm going to give you 3 seconds. More cholesterol. Which one do you think it is? More calories. Which one do you think it is? Which one is healthier? Okay, let's take a look. So let's look at cholesterol. So we have here all the labels. 0, 0, 0, 0. All of them have 0. You know why? They're all made out of plants. Only foods that are derived from animals have cholesterol. Anything that comes from a plant doesn't have cholesterol. And that rule always applies. Don't confuse cholesterol with fat. Something can have fat, and it doesn't mean that it has cholesterol. So you have to think of the source. Protein or plant. If it comes from a plant, there's no cholesterol. Okay, so what about calories? Which one has more calories? Let's look at all these serving sizes to make sure that we're comparing the same thing. 1 tablespoon, 1 tablespoon, 1 tablespoon, 1 tablespoon. Calories, 120, 120, 120, 130. About the same. About the same. So they all have the same amount of calories. So if they all have the same amount of calories, if they all have no cholesterol, then which one is the healthiest? So remember what I was telling you about, don't worry so much about the total fat, worry about the types of fat. So let me tell you again. Saturated fat, populations that have low saturated fat seem to have lower risk of heart disease. Now, when these populations replace the saturated fat with this poly and mono that I was telling you at the beginning, it seems that they're healthier. So which one has the highest mono unsaturated fat? It's olive oil. So I would say the healthier would be olive oil. So let's test your knowledge. True or false? Carrots are high in sugar. True or false? And the answer is, it is false. Because high compared to what? When something is high, then you need to compare it to something or have a standard. So let's look here at all these vegetables and let's look at carrots. And this is half a cup of cooked carrots. It has 8 grams of carbs, right? So just to do a review, the 3 nutrients, macronutrients, are fat, carbohydrates, and protein. Carbohydrates are the ones that have the most impact on blood glucose levels. We talk about the different types of fat and which ones are healthier than others. And we talked about the importance of protein and coming from foods that are lean, that do not have excess fat. So when you look at all these different vegetables, you see that the calories are minimal, the carbohydrates are minimal. So if we look at half a cup of carrot, it has 8 grams of carbohydrate. When you think of a sweet potato, it has 24 grams. So a sweet potato, half a cup of sweet potato, has 3 times the amount of carbs as carrots. Now, they're both healthy and they both fit. And you should always include vegetables, especially the dark green leafy vegetables, but all types of non-starchy vegetables, whatever you enjoy, whatever you can find, whatever you're used to, because it has fiber, it has vitamins, it has minerals, and it's healthy. So you should always have vegetables in your household. So let's go with the next one. Sugar-free foods do not raise blood sugar. Is this true or is this false? Take a look at that cupcake. It's sugar-free. Maybe you have friends and relatives telling you it's sugar-free, you have diabetes, but you can eat sugar-free. But is this true or is it false? Okay, so let's take a look. Here are sugar-free Oreos. You see how in small letter it says not a reduced calorie food. So once again, let's go to total carbohydrate. It says 17. And then we look at sugars, it says 0, and sugar alcohol, it says 8. So what does that mean? Well, you're probably thinking, well, you said at the beginning that carbohydrate turns into sugar. But if it's sugar-free, shouldn't it be 0 carbohydrate? And if you're thinking that, you are thinking correctly, right? If it's sugar-free, it should be carbohydrate-free. But that's not the case. I'll tell you why. Let's look at the ingredients. Maltitol. So maltitol is something called a sugar alcohol. And it doesn't have much of an impact on blood sugar levels. Good, right? Yes. But then what is the second ingredient? Unbleached enriched flour. And what is flour? There is carbohydrate in flour. So even though the sugar-free Oreo may not have added sugars, it does have flour. And flour has carbohydrate, and carbohydrate turns into sugar. So the answer is no, just because a food is sugar-free doesn't mean that it doesn't have carbohydrate and it's not going to raise your blood sugar. It will. Okay, so let's take a look at another food. Let's take a look at regular ice cream. Most people would say, oh my God, you're having ice cream, you have diabetes, are you crazy? So let's take a look. 2/3 of a cup, carbohydrate 19, 14 grams of added sugar. So you're probably thinking, well, this is a lot of carbohydrate, I'm not going to have it. Besides, who eat 2/3 of a cup anyway? Come on, let's be realistic. So where's the carbohydrate here? Well, it's in milk. Remember I showed you before, milk has carbohydrate. And the third ingredient is sugar. So let's take a look at the same brand, no sugar added. Right? No sugar added. It does tell you in small print, not a low-calorie food, but you're probably thinking, well, let me look at the carbs. So again, the same serving size, 2/3 of a cup, so we are comparing oranges to oranges. And then we look at the carbohydrate. It says 17. And you're thinking, but it has no sugar, so it should have no carbs. Well, it has milk, and milk has naturally occurring sugar. It has carbohydrate. So maybe they did not add sugar. Look here, they have sugar alcohol, but it has milk. So every time you see a food that says no sugar added, sugar-free, you should ask yourself, what other ingredients does it have? Because if those ingredients have carbohydrate, then it is not carbohydrate-free, and it will have an impact on your blood sugar. Now, let's take a look, compare them side by side. 2/3 of a cup, here it is 110 calories, 170. So yes, you will save some calories because they have removed the sugar. But when you look at the carbohydrate, you have 17 grams on the no added sugar and 19 grams in the regular one. So the carbohydrate is about the same. So that means that it's not going to be carbohydrate free and it will still have an effect on your blood sugar. So it's time for homework. And if you do this right, you're going to graduate with an A plus. So when you go to the supermarket, what should you be looking out for? So these are 4 ingredients, I should say 5 ingredients that every person with and without diabetes should have in the shopping cart and should be in the kitchen. You should have legumes, whether you enjoy red beans or lentils or split peas or chickpeas. Why? They have low glycemic load, meaning that once they get digested, they do have carbohydrate, but because of the amount of fiber and certain ingredients, you're not going to have a spike on blood glucose, you are going to have a slow and steady incline. The other thing is, because of the fiber, it's going to make you feel fuller. If you want to cut back on animal foods and replace them and have enough protein, this is an excellent source. You can buy them dry, you can buy them in a can. If you want to reduce the sodium, you can just rinse the water and the can several times. Rinse the beans, not the can. You should always have fruits and vegetables, whether it's in a can, whether it's frozen. Yes, you heard me, even in a can, there are low sodium varieties, whether it's frozen or whether it's fresh. You should always have vegetables and fruits in your household. You should try and buy as many whole grains as possible. These are some examples, whether it's oatmeal or brown rice, or whether you have millet or quinoa or any kind of whole grain that you enjoy. And you should have another plant and good vegetable source, which are different kinds of nuts. They do have some protein and they have staying power. So you should really always have these foods in addition to the ones that we talked about. So how should your plate look like? Your plate should look like this. You should focus on unsweetened beverages, having the healthy oils. Remember, we talked about olive oil and other plant oils. Try to reduce the amount of foods with saturated fat. Have more vegetables in any form, including vegetables that you enjoy. Having different types of fruit. And again, whatever it is that you enjoy, a healthy protein, whether you're choosing animal foods or you're choosing plant foods, and again, more whole grains. Make sure that you stay as active as possible, as many days of the week. Visit your doctor, check your blood sugar levels, and stay healthy. So now with that, it's time for graduation. You graduated, you got an A+. I'm so happy to be here with you. I am Lorena Drago, registered dietitian, nutritionist, and certified diabetes care and education specialist. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.